Welcome back, everybody, to another episode. This time, things are going to be a little bit different. I mean, still a little bit of recent sports news, but about an old familiar face. Recently, over this weekend, the University of Hawaii and a lot of the Hawaiian populace at large had a celebration of life for the one and only Colt Brennan, the man partially responsible for the name of this podcast and is on the currently on the iconography of the podcast as we're working on getting a new logo, graphic banner worked up, trying to upgrade things, but his ashes were spread this over this weekend at Waikiki Beach. A lot of former teammates, current Hawaii players, showed a lot of love, including his cousin who's the current head coach of San Diego State University, their football team, and a lot of old Western Athletic Conference teams also showed their love as well. So I thought, why not go through some of my memories of the God, the big God, and some things, that aren't from memory, but just things that led up to him becoming the star that true college football fans remember from back in those days. Fortunately, last year he died of a drug overdose, fentanyl, opioids, part of the crisis that's currently tearing down America and people everywhere. And unfortunately, Colt fell victim to that. Even though the prior years he had had issues with substance abuse, which sort of seemed to stem from a car accident he got into in 2010, which left him with a traumatic brain injury. Which, if you know anything about that, which they say and have documented that, you know, people who suffer traumatic brain injuries can show extreme difference in personalities and behavior from who they were prior to the injury. And Colt seemed to have been one of those individuals who became more impulsive and emotional. And his autopsy after his death showed he had um, the stage one signs of CTE. But his unfortunate demise came at 37 years old, and he's greatly remembered among the college football fandom because he is one of those people who's on that short list of guys who put his team on the map and area of the country for football on the map because he was of the era when Boise State was rising up as well that sort of put that Western football on the map that was not of what was currently then the Pac 10, which is now the Pac 12, but he put those teams on the map, helped that process putting those teams on the map with Boise State, Utah, Hawaii, and that, hey, there's great football being played out west. That's not those 10 teams of USC, UCLA, Washington State, Oregon State. And I know I'm forgetting another team in there as well, but today's not about them. But it sort of helped, uh, and Colorado State, and it helped to seal in that hey, there's big boy football being played out west, and serious football being played in Hawaii. As in, the coach who was his coach then, Jim Jones, he had put together a good program. Even with the current head coach of Hawaii was the quarterback before Colt Brennan, Timmy Chang. They put together, a decent amount of 8, 9 win seasons of a 12-win schedule. But, never got over that hump of, being able to beat, some of the ranked teams or some of those Pac teams or S.E.C teams, the major conference teams. But one Colt Brennan of Laguna Beach, who went to modern day high school. If you know anything about, college football, modern day high school, that's a very good place when it comes to quarterbacks, including Colt Brennan, who at that point in time he was at the school. He was the backup to eventual Heisman winner Matt Leinart, and so Colt originally was supposed to go to the University. He was at the University of Utah, but he ran into a drunken incident his freshman year, and that sort of changed his course. He went played JUCO, became a JUCO All American. Then, '05, he ended up at the University of Hawaii, and that's when things started ticking. They had about a 5-6 win season his first season there, but he immediately became the starter. They People knew something was different. Then that next season, they rattled off about 11 wins, which features like their last two games are like being are nationally televised in regular regular hours. Like, so this is going from, hey, we they can't really get regional broadcasts out west, maybe some local broadcasts, some when they play some of the Cali teams, to being nationally broadcast on ESPN to end your season. That's a big thing. But I mean, to end their season like in typical fashion, they played in the Hawaii Bowl at Hawaii. Colt Brennan led that team, you know. But then that next season, they followed it. They followed up even better. That '07 season, Colt Brennan was coming out, taking names, signing them on the dotted line. They came out, won every game until they lost the lost a took a pretty tough loss to Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. But at the end of the season, ranked number 10, he sort of put his team on the map, sort of in the same vein. At the same time that Pat White was at the University of West Virginia, where hey, there's this guy at quarterback who's unlike anything you've ever seen, and is lighting teams up. First, it starts out he takes out their conference, and everyone's like, "Whoa, let's see how they do against big time competition." And when Colt Brennan had his opportunity against that big competition, he took out Boise State when they were just beginning at the height of their powers. When they just the season before, the infamous, Statue of Liberty play, he took down that Boise State. He went in, beat Washington, beat I think, yeah, he beat up Oregon State team. So their names on the map, and Colt Brennan single handedly changed the image of Hawaiian football, and not even just Hawaiian football. I guess you would call it Polynesian, Micronesian, Pacific Islander view of football, where we have these guys coming coming out of the Pacific Islander Islander nations that even though Colt was a white kid from California, he was able to bond with the culture there at the University of Hawaii, and then representing the team and fully connecting with the culture and like being all in with it. He helped sort of change the face of what would become this future of kids coming out of Pacific Islander nations such as America, Samoa, Hawaii, the Philippines, and such. And that has led to these players being taken serious. They take football serious. They're proud of the football they have. To producing great talent such as a Marcus Mariota and a Tua Tagovailoa. No matter how you feel about both of those two players' accomplishments in the NFL, but they are sort of directly off that Colt Brennan tree of have watching him play in Hawaii. That's their home team. They're proud of the football they're seeing and want to be like the guy who they just saw. And Colt was one of those guys who us hardcore college football fans who were fans back then, because the way I came into it, I started watching, you know, around like '02, '03. I started getting into watching college football, but then, of course, that '05 championship between Texas and USC sort of like cemented, like, oh, I'm all in with this. And this is and then after that, sort of came this era of like, hey, you got a lot of these blue blood schools, during this BCS championship, where it's sort of like the blue bloods are trying to compete to get in that BCS championship game, but only two teams can make it. So, what happened over that course of time in that era was a lot of kids stopped wanting to, just like they are now, just all pile up on a few of the good teams in the power conferences and be like, hey, I just want to get playing time immediately so I can move to the next level, which happened at a lot of schools. You had that's how Oregon had this high flying offense even before Chip Kelly arrived. You had guys such as like a Michael Crabtree who would normally play at a Texas or a Texas A&M, decide to go to Texas Tech, the smaller school that plays against those big schools, and be like, hey, I'm starting from my freshman year. I'm gonna win the Bolitnikov. Just put up an insane highlight reel. And Colt Brennan was of that era where you had these squads that weren't always gonna be, hey, we're gonna take out everybody, but these squads where it's like, hey, they're gonna take out a lot of good people, and it's gonna be fun to watch them. And Colt stood back in that pocket and slung the ball. He willed out some wins, like a few good wins, very close games, a couple of overtime wins where he just put the team on his back. And at that time, it was something to see because it's just one of those things where it's like, hey, football's not over, as the name of this podcast says. It's 1 a.m. Eastern time. There's still football on TV, and there's this kid playing for the University of Hawaii who's lighting everybody up all day, every day, which sort of changed the whole frame of like, hey, ESPN still has something to show Saturday night after 11 p.m. And Colt was one of the guys who was one of the original faces of that. Of hey, this ain't Sports Center time. This is hey, we still got football. We got a block to fill in with somebody who people are gonna watch. Not since I guess like Marshall Falk was at San Diego State University. Cole was sort of that next guy who filled in that. Well, not the next guy. This isn't backfact. This is like he was the next guy after Marshall Falk to fill in that spot. Of like, hey, there's somebody who people want to see, who has this crazy talent, one of a kind smile, and an excellent hairdo, and changed a changed the way a program was viewed, and became the face of that program. Because you tell anybody, even Timmy Chang, the current head football coach, of all the records he has, when you think of Hawaii Rainbow Warriors football, there's only one face that comes up, and it's Colt Brennan. And those years of watching him play football and just making a complete mess of everybody who came his way was something special, especially that '06 season. He puts up the record 58 touchdowns, 58 through the air, 5 on the ground, only 12 interceptions, and 5,500 passing yards. He puts up those records, and it's just boom. People start thinking, wait, this is the best quarterback in football? Not one of these guys who we get to see play at these, the noon hours for Eastern Standard Time, or like, that 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock hours. Like, nah, it's a kid who's playing football when you're probably asleep, and he's just lighting everything up, just doing what he has to do, and talks for the Davy O'Brien Award, got a Sammy Ball Award, got the Johnny Unitas finalist, Heisman finalist. This is a guy who made All American list, of course, definitely all conference honors, conference player of the year. But he was part. Cole Brennan was part of an important part of college football. He was the rebranding of the smaller teams of the West, making them fun to watch and knowing that they're competitive to be there. And it's unfortunate. It was very unfortunate to hear of his passing, but they spread his ashes over the weekend at Waikiki Beach, and hopefully he can rest in peace. And as an old proverb says, as long as someone's name is still spoken, they never die. And in the world of college football, Colt Brennan shall be eternal. Thanks for listening. That's this episode for today. Y'all be easy. During this brief intermission, I just wanted to remind all our listeners that we are available on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and we also have a Twitter account where you guys can interact with us and catch up with us, see our ideas on some things happening between our podcast episodes. Links will always be down in the description. And now back to the action.